My boss mocked my sick mother in front of the entire staff meeting. He did not realize his email confession was displayed on the projector. Dennis Hartwell was mid-sentence about my emotional instability and using my dying mother as an excuse for poor performance when I saw Amy's face go pale. She was staring at the projection screen behind Dennis, her mouth hanging open. I followed her gaze and felt my heart stop. The quarterly sales presentation had minimized somehow, and Dennis's email inbox filled the entire 12-foot screen. The subject line of his most recent sent message was visible to all 35 people in the conference room. R.E. Graham Foster Performance Issues. Confidential attorney consultation. Dennis kept talking, oblivious, gesturing at me with his laser pointer. We all have family problems, Graham. Some of us just handle them like adults, instead of crying to HR every 5 minutes about needing special accommodations. I couldn't process his words because I was reading his email displayed in 48-point font behind him. The preview text was visible beneath the subject line. Need advice on terminating employee whose mother has terminal cancer. How do I document performance issues to avoid discrimination claim? He's been with company 8 years, but his numbers are... The room erupted in whispers. People were pointing at the screen. Dennis finally noticed everyone's attention had shifted behind him and turned around. His face went from confusion to absolute horror in the span of 2 seconds. He lunged for his laptop, but Amy's hand shot out and grabbed his wrist. "Don't touch it," she said loudly. "Everyone in this room just witnessed what you really think about Graham's situation." Dennis jerked his arm away from her. "That's a private email. You have no right to read my confidential correspondence." But people were already taking out their phones, photographing the screen before Dennis could close his laptop. I stood frozen, watching my boss realize he'd just destroyed his own career while trying to humiliate me for having a dying mother. The IT director, Foster Chen, was sitting in the back row. He stood up and said, "Dennis, step away from the laptop. That email is now evidence in what's about to become a very serious HR investigation." Dennis's face turned red. "Evidence of what?" "I have every right to consult legal counsel about employee performance issues." Foster walked to the front and positioned himself between Dennis and the computer. "You have the right to consult counsel. You don't have the right to fabricate performance issues to fire someone whose mother is dying of cancer. That's called retaliation, and it's illegal." I finally found my voice. "My sales numbers are 3rd highest in the department this quarter. I've missed 6 days in 3 months, all approved through FMLA. What performance issues?" Dennis pointed at me with shaking hands. "Your attitude, your constant requests for schedule changes, the way you make everything about your personal problems instead of focusing on work." Amy stood up beside me. "Graham's attitude has been professional, despite dealing with his mother dying. You're the one who just told a room full of witnesses that he's playing nurse and going on a farewell tour. Those were your exact words." Dennis looked around the room at 35 faces staring at him with disgust and shock. "You're all taking his side? He's been manipulating everyone with his sob story for months. Poor Graham, his mommy is sick, so we all have to pick up his slack and pretend he's doing a good job." The HR director, Patricia Vance, had been sitting in the front row. She stood, and her voice cut through the room. "Dennis, this meeting is over. You need to come with me immediately. Do not touch that laptop. Do not speak to anyone. Do not leave the building." Dennis tried to laugh it off. "Patricia, let's not be dramatic. This is a misunderstanding. My email was taken out of context." Patricia's expression was granite. "Your email where you admit to documenting fake performance issues to fire an employee with a sick family member? That context?" Dennis realized he was cornered. His eyes darted to the exits. "I want to speak to my attorney before I say anything else." Patricia nodded. "That's your right, but you're suspended effective immediately pending investigation. Security will escort you to collect your personal items. Your company laptop, phone, and all files remain here." 2 security guards I hadn't noticed before appeared at the door. Dennis looked at them, then at the 35 witnesses sitting in stunned silence, then at me. "This is your fault, Graham. You couldn't just do your job without making your personal life everyone's problem." Foster from IT had been doing something on Dennis's laptop. "Actually, Dennis, you made it everyone's problem when you sent that email from your company account during work hours about conspiring to illegally terminate an employee, which, I should mention, you sent to an attorney named Richard Billings who, according to the email thread I'm looking at right now, advised you not to pursue this course of action. He specifically wrote that firing Graham under these circumstances would be actionable discrimination." Dennis went white. "You're illegally accessing my private emails." Foster smiled without humor. "These emails are on a company server using company equipment during company time regarding company personnel. There's nothing private about them. And I'm the IT director, so accessing them is literally my job when HR requests an investigation." Patricia gestured to the security guards. "Dennis, you need to leave now." Dennis grabbed his suit jacket from the back of his chair. As the guards approached him, he pointed at me one more time. 8 years you've worked here, Graham. 8 years of mediocre performance that I covered for. The moment I try to hold you accountable, everyone acts like I'm the villain." I took a step, toward him. "My mother is dying. I have 2 weeks left with her if I'm lucky. And you stood in front of 35 people and mocked her, called caring for her a farewell tour, told me I was emotionally unstable for wanting to be at the hospital. Then we all saw your email where you admitted you're fabricating reasons to fire me for taking legally protected leave. You're not the villain because you held me accountable. You're the villain because you're actually a villain. The security guards took Dennis by each arm and let him out. He didn't resist, just kept muttering about lawsuits and wrongful termination. The door closed behind them, and the conference room stayed silent for a long moment. Patricia turned to address everyone. What happened here today will be fully investigated. I need statements from everyone who was present. Graham, I need you to come with me to document everything Dennis said and everything you saw on that screen. Amy raised her hand. I recorded the whole thing on my phone, from the moment Dennis started mocking Graham's mother until security took him out. Patricia's eyebrows went up. You recorded the meeting? Amy held up her phone. I've been recording all of Dennis's meetings for the past month. He's been creating a hostile work environment for multiple people, and I wanted evidence in case anyone filed a complaint. This is just the first time he was stupid enough to have his crimes displayed on a projector while he committed them. Patricia looked at me. Graham, I'm so sorry you had to experience this. Your FMLA paperwork is in perfect order. Your performance reviews have been consistently excellent until Dennis took over as department head 6 months ago. We'll be addressing all of this, but first, you said the hospital texted you. You need to be with your mother. I had completely forgotten about the text. I pulled out my phone and saw 3 more messages. Mom asking for oxygen support, blood pressure dropping. Doctor recommends family come now. My hands started shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. I have to go. My mom... Patricia put her hand on my shoulder. Go. Take all the time you need. FMLA protects your job and your benefits. We'll handle everything here. Amy grabbed her purse. I'll drive you. You're in no condition. I wanted to argue, but she was right. We left the conference room and I could hear people talking behind us, voices raised in anger about what Dennis had done. Amy drove fast through downtown traffic toward County General Hospital. How long has Dennis been planning to fire you? Her voice was tight with anger. I stared out the window. I don't know. He's been weird since Mom got diagnosed in June, making comments about my schedule, questioning my doctor's notes, implying I was exaggerating how sick she was. But I thought he was just being an insensitive boss. I didn't realize he was actually plotting to get rid of me. Amy's hands gripped the steering wheel. He's been terrible to everyone. Making Julia stay late every night even though she has 2 kids in daycare. Telling Kevin his project presentation was garbage in front of clients. Screaming at interns for minor mistakes. But what he did to you today was different. That was cruelty. We pulled into the hospital parking garage and I ran through the main entrance to the elevators. The ICU was on the 7th floor. When I got to my mother's room, my sister Claire was already there, holding Mom's hand. Mom's eyes were closed and she had an oxygen mask over her face. Machines beeped steadily, monitoring her vitals. Claire looked up when I walked in and tears were streaming down her face. They said maybe a few more hours. Her organs are starting to fail. I sat on the other side of the bed and took Mom's other hand. It was cold and thin, the skin papery and bruised from all the IVs. I'm here, Mom. I'm sorry it took me so long to get here. Mom's eyes fluttered open. She tried to smile behind the oxygen mask. The nurse came in and explained that Mom's kidneys were shutting down, her blood pressure was unstable, and they were making her comfortable. There was nothing more they could do. I sat there holding my mother's hand while she died slowly over the next 6 hours. Claire and I took turns talking to her, telling her we loved her, sharing memories. Amy stayed in the waiting room the whole time, bringing us coffee and food we couldn't eat. Mom passed away at 8:43 that night. The nurse checked her vitals and nodded to us. She's gone. I'm so sorry for your loss. Claire collapsed into my arms, sobbing. I held her and couldn't cry yet because nothing felt real. The woman who raised us, who taught me to read, who came to every school event, who called me every Sunday without fail, was just gone. The nurse gave us time alone with her before they had to move her body. We sat there for another hour not wanting to leave because leaving meant accepting she was really dead. Amy drove me home around midnight. My apartment was dark and cold. I sat on the couch and finally cried, huge gasping sobs that made my whole body hurt. Amy sat beside me and didn't say anything, just stayed there so I wouldn't be alone. Around 2 a.m., my phone buzzed with an email. Patricia from HR. Graham, I know this is the worst possible time, but I wanted you to know we completed our initial investigation. Dennis has been terminated effective immediately for cause. His email correspondence revealed a pattern of discrimination and retaliation. We'll be in touch about next steps, but please take all the time you need. Again, I'm deeply sorry for your loss and for what Dennis put you through. I showed Amy the email. She read it and said, Good. He deserves everything coming to him. The next 2 weeks were a blur of funeral arrangements, insurance paperwork, cleaning out Mom's apartment, and sitting in my own apartment staring at walls. Claire handled most of the funeral planning because I couldn't function. The service was on a Saturday, and 200 people came. Mom had taught elementary school for 30 years, and her former students, now adults, showed up to pay respects. Amy came to the funeral along with a dozen people from work, which surprised me. They filed past the casket and offered condolences that I nodded at but didn't really hear. After the burial, Claire and I went back to Mom's apartment to continue sorting through her things. We found boxes of photos, baby clothes she'd saved from when we were little, report cards and art projects from elementary school. Every item was a memory that made the loss feel heavier. She kept everything, Claire said, holding up a macaroni picture frame I'd made in first grade. She was so proud of us. I found a folder labeled Graham in Mom's desk drawer. Inside were articles I'd written for the company newsletter, a promotion announcement from 3 years ago, and a printed email where I'd told her about a big sale I'd closed. She'd kept all of it, documented my career like she used to document my childhood. My phone rang. Unknown number. I answered and heard, "Mr. Foster? This is Richard Billings. I'm an employment attorney. I believe you recently had an incident with your former supervisor, Dennis Hartwell." My stomach clenched. "How did you get my number?" Billings cleared his throat. "I want to be transparent with you. Dennis contacted me several weeks ago asking for advice on terminating your employment due to what he called performance issues related to your mother's illness. I advised him in writing that doing so would constitute illegal retaliation and disability discrimination. He ignored my advice and appears to have proceeded anyway. I'm calling because I feel ethically obligated to inform you that you likely have grounds for a significant lawsuit against both Dennis personally and your company." I sat down at Mom's kitchen table. "The company fired Dennis. They apologized. I don't want to sue anyone. I just want to grieve my mother in peace." Billings was quiet for a moment. "I understand, but you should know that Dennis's emails, which I understand were accidentally displayed to your entire department, contain evidence that his harassment of you began the day your mother's diagnosis was disclosed to HR. He systematically downgraded your performance reviews, assigned you impossible quotas, and documented false policy violations. This wasn't just an insensitive comment. This was a months-long campaign to force you out of your job while your mother was dying." I felt rage building in my chest. "Why are you telling me this?" Billings sighed. "Because Dennis is now threatening to sue the company for wrongful termination. He's claiming he was exercising his managerial discretion and was fired for trying to enforce performance standards. He's also threatening to sue you personally for defamation based on statements you allegedly made during the meeting." I almost laughed. "He's suing me? He's the one who mocked my dying mother in front of 35 witnesses and had his confession displayed on a screen." Billings agreed. "His case has no merit, but he's going to drag this out, make everything public, and potentially cost you tens of thousands in legal fees defending yourself. Unless you file first with evidence so overwhelming that he has to back down." Claire was watching me from across the room. I mouthed, "Work stuff," and she rolled her eyes. Billings continued. "I'd like to represent you if you decide to pursue this. My firm specializes in employment discrimination. We'd work on contingency, meaning you pay nothing unless we win. And based on what I've seen, we'd win. Substantially." I thought about Dennis standing in front of that conference room, smirking while he described my mother's death as a farewell tour. Thought about him plotting to fire me while I sat at her hospital bedside. Thought about him getting away with it except for the random accident of his email being displayed. "Let me think about it," I told Billings. "I just buried my mother today. I need time." Billings gave me his direct number and said to call any time. After we hung up, Claire asked what that was about. I explained everything. Her face went from confused to furious. "You have to sue him. You can't let him get away with treating you that way. Mom would be livid if she knew." She was right. Mom had always taught us to stand up to bullies and fight for what was right, but I was so tired. Tired from watching her die. Tired from 3 months of hospitals and terrible news. Tired from being strong. "I don't know if I have the energy for a legal battle," I admitted. Claire sat beside me and took my hand. "Then let the lawyer do the fighting. You just have to show up and tell the truth." That night, I couldn't sleep. Kept replaying Dennis's words. The way he'd smiled when he called it a farewell tour. The casual cruelty of someone mocking a person's dying parent for professional gain. I called Richard Billings on Monday morning. "I want to move forward with the lawsuit, but I want it to be about more than money. I want Dennis to face actual consequences for what he did." Billings scheduled a meeting at his office for that afternoon. His firm occupied 3 floors of a downtown high-rise. The reception area had floor-to-ceiling windows and expensive art on the walls. Billings met me in the lobby, a man in his 50s with gray hair and sharp eyes. "Thank you for coming in. I know this is a difficult time." We sat in a conference room and he pulled out a thick folder. "I've obtained copies of Dennis's email correspondence through discovery requests. With your company's cooperation, since they want to avoid liability themselves. What I found is worse than I initially thought." He spread out printed emails across the table. I started reading. The earliest was dated June 15th, 3 days after I'd submitted FMLA paperwork for my mother's diagnosis. Dennis had written to another manager. "Graham Foster just filed for family leave because his mother has cancer. This is going to destroy our Q3 numbers. Need to document performance issues now so we can move on this once the legal window closes." Another email from July showed Dennis instructing managers to reject my client meeting requests and assign them to other reps. "Make sure Graham's territory gets carved up. We need his numbers to justify termination." In August, he'd written to HR with false complaints about my attendance. claiming I'd missed meetings that had never been scheduled. HR had investigated and found the claims baseless, but Dennis kept the paper trail anyway. September showed him contacting multiple employment attorneys, shopping for one who would tell him what he wanted to hear. Most had refused. Richard Billings had been the last one he'd contacted. "This is a textbook retaliation case," Billings explained. "From the moment you exercised your legal right to family medical leave, Dennis began constructing a false narrative to justify your termination. The fact that he did this while your mother was actively dying makes it particularly egregious." I felt sick reading the emails. He hated me because my mom was sick. That's what this was. He saw me as an inconvenience. Billings nodded. "That's exactly what this was. And the law is very clear that you can't punish employees for having sick family members or using the medical leave they're entitled to." I asked what the next steps were. Billings explained we'd file a formal complaint with the EEOC first, then proceed to federal court if needed. We'd be suing Dennis personally for harassment and emotional distress, and we'd be suing the company for failing to protect me from a hostile work environment. "The company will likely settle quickly," Billings said. "They fired Dennis and have been cooperative with the investigation. They don't want this in court. Dennis, on the other hand, seems determined to fight this." I signed the retainer agreement and authorized Billings to file the complaint. "One more thing," he said as I was leaving. "Be prepared for Dennis to come after you publicly. He's already started spreading rumors that you fabricated your mother's illness for sympathy and manipulated the situation to get him fired. Some people will believe him." I thought about Mom's funeral 2 days ago, her casket being lowered into the ground. Let him try. I have a death certificate and 3 months of hospital records. What does he have? The EEOC complaint was filed the following week. Within 24 hours, the story broke in the local business press. Tech company manager fired after mocking employee's dying mother during meeting. The article detailed the incident, including quotes from witnesses and mentions of the projected email. Dennis responded with his own statement, claiming he was the victim of a coordinated character assassination by a vindictive subordinate who'd been underperforming for years. He claimed I'd used my mother's illness to avoid accountability and had manipulated other employees into supporting my false narrative. The article included his quotes. "Graham Foster is a mediocre salesman who found a convenient excuse for his failures. When I tried to address legitimate performance concerns, he weaponized his personal situation and got me fired. Now he's trying to profit from it with a frivolous lawsuit." Reading his statement made me physically ill. Amy called me within minutes. "Have you seen what Dennis is saying?" I told her I had. She was livid. "He's calling all of us liars, saying we coordinated some conspiracy against him. I'm prepared to testify to everything I saw and recorded." The next day, Dennis appeared on a local radio show that covered business news. I listened to the interview in my car. The host asked him about the incident, and Dennis spun an elaborate story about a troubled employee who'd been underperforming for months, who'd violated company policies repeatedly, who'd become hostile when confronted about his work quality. The day of the meeting, Graham became verbally aggressive when I addressed his attendance issues. He created a scene, other employees took his side out of misplaced sympathy, and management panicked and fired me to avoid bad publicity. Now he's suing for millions because he knows the optics favor him. The host asked about the email that had been displayed. Dennis claimed it was taken out of context. I was consulting an attorney about proper documentation procedures for a standard performance review. That's not illegal. That's responsible management. Graham and his lawyer have twisted it into something sinister. The interview made him sound reasonable and measured, made me sound manipulative. I called Billings furious. He's lying about everything and people are believing him. Billings was calm. "Let him talk. Every statement he makes publicly is evidence we can use in court. He's contradicting himself and creating a record of dishonesty." Social media picked up the story next. Dennis had created accounts on every platform posting his version of events. He shared fake screenshots of performance reviews he claimed he'd written about me, posted about the stress of being falsely accused and losing his career over political correctness run amok. His posts got thousands of shares and comments. Half the people supported him, saying companies were too soft on underperforming employees and that I was playing the victim. The other half called him a monster for mocking someone's dying mother. I made the mistake of reading the comments. People who'd never met me or my mother weighing in on whether she was really sick, whether I was really grieving, whether I deserved sympathy or condemnation. Amy posted her video of the meeting to counter Dennis's narrative. The 9-minute clip showed everything. Dennis mocking my mother, calling her death a farewell tour. His face when he realized his email was displayed, his attempts to deny what everyone could see. The video went viral. Millions of views in 48 hours. News outlets picked it up. The story escalated from local business drama to national conversation about workplace discrimination and abuse of power. Dennis's narrative collapsed under the weight of video evidence. His social media accounts went quiet. But 2 weeks later, he filed his own lawsuit. Not just against the company for wrongful termination, but against me personally for defamation and intentional infliction of emotional distress. He claimed I'd orchestrated the entire incident to destroy his reputation and career. The lawsuit was clearly retaliatory, designed to drain my resources and make me back down. Billings filed a motion to dismiss it as frivolous, but the judge allowed it to proceed to discovery. That meant depositions, interrogatories, document requests, months of legal procedures while I was trying to grieve my mother. The company settled with me 3 months after the incident. Their lawyers made it clear they wanted to avoid trial and the publicity it would bring. The settlement was substantial, covering my legal fees, lost wages, emotional distress, and punitive damages. I had to sign an NDA about the amount, but it was enough to not worry about money for years. But settling with the company didn't resolve Dennis's lawsuit against me. His attorneys were aggressive, filing motions constantly, demanding access to my medical records, my mother's medical records, my therapy notes, my text messages, trying to find anything they could use to paint me as the aggressor. The deposition was scheduled for a cold morning in January. I sat across a conference table from Dennis for the first time since the meeting. He looked older, thinner, more bitter. His attorney asked me hundreds of questions over 6 hours. When had I first learned about my mother's diagnosis? How many days of work had I missed? Had I ever made negative comments about Dennis? Had I conspired with Amy to record the meeting? Had I intentionally caused his email to display on the projector? That last question made me stop. Are you seriously suggesting I hacked his computer to make his confession appear on a screen while he was mocking my dying mother? Dennis's attorney didn't blink. Did you? I looked at Dennis directly. Your client destroyed his own career by being cruel enough to mock a dying woman and stupid enough to document his illegal intentions in writing. I didn't have to do anything. He did it all himself. Dennis's face turned red. His attorney told him not to respond. But Dennis couldn't help himself. You ruined my life because you couldn't handle being held accountable for once. You're a professional victim who manipulates everyone with your sob stories. My attorney objected and terminated the deposition. As we packed up, Dennis stood and pointed at me. Your mother wouldn't be proud of what you're doing, using her death to extort money and destroy someone's career. I stood up so fast my chair fell backward. Don't you ever talk about my mother. You don't get to say her name after what you did. Security had to separate us. Dennis was escorted out of the building, still yelling about how I'd orchestrated everything. My attorney drove me home, and I spent the rest of the day shaking with rage. That night, I pulled out the folder I'd found in Mom's apartment. The articles, the promotion announcement, the email about my big sale. Evidence of how proud she'd been of my career. Evidence that I'd been good at my job before Dennis tried to destroy it. I thought about what Claire had said after the funeral, that Mom would want me to fight back against bullies. She was right. I called Billings. I want to countersue Dennis for malicious prosecution and abuse of process. He's only suing me to punish me for reporting his discrimination. I want him to face consequences for that too. Billings filed the countersuit the next week. We added claims for intentional infliction of emotional distress based on his comments about my mother and his continued harassment through frivolous litigation. Dennis's attorney tried to get the countersuit dismissed, but the judge denied the motion. The case was going to trial. Both cases, mine and his, consolidated into one trial that would determine who was telling the truth. Jury selection happened in March. We spent 2 days interviewing potential jurors, trying to find 12 people who could be fair despite the media coverage. The trial started on a rainy morning in April. The courthouse was packed with reporters and spectators. Dennis sat at the defense table in an expensive suit, trying to look like a victim. The opening statements laid out 2 completely different versions of reality. Dennis's attorney painted me as a manipulative employee who'd weaponized my personal tragedy to avoid accountability and destroy an effective manager who'd tried to enforce standards. My attorney showed the jury the timeline of Dennis's emails, the video of the meeting, and the testimony of 35 witnesses who'd heard him mock my dying mother. The prosecution called witnesses over 3 days. Amy testified first, describing the hostile work environment Dennis had created and the meeting where he'd mocked my mother while his confession was displayed behind him. She showed the jury her video, playing it on screens throughout the courtroom. Several jurors looked disgusted. Patricia from HR testified about Dennis's pattern of fabricating performance issues after I'd filed for FMLA leave. She brought documentation showing my actual performance had been excellent before Dennis took over as manager. Foster from IT explained how Dennis's email had ended up on the projector, a technical glitch where his laptop had connected to the wrong display. Dennis's attorney tried to suggest it was deliberate sabotage, but Foster shut that down with detailed technical explanations. Other co-workers testified about Dennis's behavior, his cruelty toward multiple employees, his specific targeting of me after my mother's diagnosis. The pattern was clear and overwhelming. Dennis's defense was that he'd been doing his job, that my performance had genuinely declined, that he had a right to manage his team without accusations of discrimination. His attorney called witnesses who testified that I'd seemed distracted at work, that I'd missed deadlines, that my sales numbers had dropped. On cross-examination, my attorney established that all these witnesses worked in different departments and had no direct knowledge of my actual work. We called rebuttal witnesses who worked directly with me and testified my work had remained excellent despite the stress of my mother's illness. Richard Billings himself testified about the email Dennis had sent him, asking for advice on firing me. He read Dennis's words to the jury. I need to get rid of Graham Foster, but his mother is dying of cancer, and he's using FMLA. How do I document performance issues that will justify termination without triggering a discrimination claim? The jury sat in silence, absorbing that. Billings explained he'd advised Dennis in writing that such a termination would be illegal, that Dennis had ignored that advice and proceeded with his plan anyway. Dennis took the stand in his own defense. His attorney asked him to explain his side. Dennis insisted he'd been legitimately concerned about my performance, that he'd never intended to discriminate, that his comments at the meeting had been misunderstood. My attorney's cross-examination was brutal. She walked Dennis through his emails chronologically, making him read his own words aloud. Graham Foster just filed for family leave because his mother has cancer. This is going to destroy our Q3 numbers. Need to document performance issues now. She asked him what legitimate performance issues existed the day after I'd filed for FMLA. Dennis stammered. I was anticipating problems. She showed him my sales numbers, proving they'd been strong that entire quarter. So you documented anticipated problems that never actually materialized? Dennis got defensive. I was being proactive. She pulled up the email to Richard Billings. Is it proactive management to ask an attorney how to fire someone for taking legally protected leave? Dennis insisted he was consulting about proper procedures. She read his words back to him. You specifically asked how to justify termination without triggering a discrimination claim. That's not asking about procedures. That's asking how to commit discrimination without getting caught. Dennis's face turned red. You're twisting my words. She played the video of the meeting, making Dennis watch himself mock my dying mother. The jury watched him too, their faces hardening. Mr. Hartwell, you told Mr. Foster his mother had been dying for 3 months and he needed to stop his prolonged farewell tour. What did? You mean by that? Dennis tried to explain it away. I was frustrated by his constant absences. I spoke poorly in a moment of stress. My attorney pressed him. His mother died that same day, 6 hours after this meeting. He rushed to the hospital based on a text from her ICU nurse. Were you aware his mother was in the ICU that morning? Dennis admitted he'd known. And you still chose to mock her dying as a farewell tour in front of 35 colleagues? Dennis had no good answer. I shouldn't have said that. I apologize. My attorney looked at the jury. You're apologizing now, after being sued, after being fired, after Mr. Foster's mother actually died. You didn't apologize at the time. In fact, you tried to terminate Mr. Foster the following week before your termination interrupted those plans, correct? Dennis's lawyer objected, but the judge overruled. Dennis admitted he'd begun termination paperwork. The defense rested. Closing arguments happened the next day. Dennis's attorney argued that everyone sometimes says things they regret in stressful situations, that Dennis's emails showed concern about performance, not discrimination, that I'd overreacted and destroyed a man's career over an unfortunate comment. My attorney argued that Dennis had engaged in systematic retaliation against an employee who'd exercised his legal rights, that he'd mocked a dying woman to humiliate her son, and that he'd documented his illegal intentions in his own words. The jury deliberated for 7 hours. When they came back, the forewoman read the verdict. We find in favor of the plaintiff, Graham Foster, on all counts. We award compensatory damages of $340,000 for emotional distress, lost wages, and damage to professional reputation. We award punitive damages of $2.1 million to punish the defendant's willful and malicious conduct. The courtroom erupted. Dennis's face went white. The jury forewoman continued. We find the defendant's lawsuit against Mr. Foster was filed in bad faith for purposes of retaliation and harassment. We award Mr. Foster an additional $180,000 in damages for malicious prosecution. My attorney squeezed my shoulder. Dennis stood there looking destroyed. His attorney was frantically whispering to him. The judge thanked the jury and set a date for post-trial motions. Outside the courthouse, reporters surrounded us. My attorney made a brief statement about justice being served and victims of workplace discrimination having rights. Dennis's attorney announced they'd appeal. But over the following months, Dennis's appeal was denied at every level. The verdict stood. The damages were substantial enough that Dennis had to declare bankruptcy. He lost his house, his cars, his savings. The judgment would follow him for years. 6 months after the trial, I got an email from Richard Billings. Thought you'd want to know. Dennis Hartwell was denied employment at 3 different companies this month. All cited the court verdict and video of the meeting, as reasons. He's essentially unemployable in this industry now. I forwarded the email to Claire. She wrote back, good, he earned it. I'd gone back to work 3 months after the trial. The company had promoted me to regional sales director, Dennis's old position. My team respected me, and I made it a priority to support them through personal crises the way Dennis had refused to support me. Amy became my assistant director. We built a department culture based on treating people as humans first and employees second. Every year on the anniversary of Mom's death, I took the day off and visited her grave, told her about my life, my career, the justice we'd fought for. Year 3, I brought Claire and her daughter, my niece, who'd been born 2 months after the trial. We left flowers and told stories about Grandma. As we walked back to the car, Claire said, Mom would be proud of you, not just for winning the case, but for becoming the kind of leader who protects people instead of crushing them. 5 years after the meeting, I received a message from someone who'd been in that conference room. Julia, the coworker Dennis had been overworking despite her childcare situation. I just wanted to thank you, she wrote. Watching you stand up to Dennis gave me courage to report my own abusive boss at my new company. They investigated and found he'd been harassing multiple women. He was fired. Your fight made a difference for people you'll never meet. Dennis faded into obscurity, his name becoming a cautionary tale in business schools about workplace discrimination and abuse of power. The video of the meeting was used in HR training seminars as an example of how not to manage employees. His email became a case study in employment law courses. He'd wanted to punish me for having a dying mother and ended up immortalizing his own cruelty. 7 years later, I stood in front of a room full of business students at the university where Mom had taught elementary education. They'd invited me to speak about workplace ethics and discrimination. I told them about Dennis, about the meeting, about the fight for justice. The lesson isn't just about legal rights, I said. It's about the fact that cruelty has consequences. Dennis thought he had the power to mock my dying mother and destroy my career, but he forgot that power without humanity is just tyranny, and tyranny always falls eventually. Mom would have loved that line. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.